I was thinking this morning about that question, and someone desired a corporeal response to a spiritual question, and the fact of the matter is, you can't answer a spiritual question via corporeal explanation. Now you can use analogies, and that sometimes works, but in order for a person to understand something that is stated spiritually, how to understand that is that a person has to understand that first of all, that there's two realms. There's an outer realm and an inner realm. Your inner realm, your inner life. What is your inner life? Well, we know what the outer life is. The outer life is the corporeal life. But the inner life, what is the inner life? Now, the inner life is your thoughts, for instance, or your aspirations, your emotions, your imagination, your inspirations, your contemplations, the spirit of your thoughts, the spirit of your discourse. Those are all inner realm phenomena. And the inner realm phenomena, so the inner realm, the inner realm phenomena has rules of its own. They're different from the rules from the outer realm. So what are some of these inner realm rules? Some of these inner realm rules are like, as you sow, so shall ye reap. That's an inner realm rule. And these are realities. Happiness, for instance, is a reality. And joy, they call them, in the corporeans or mortals call them states, or so modern psychologists calls them, or at least they used to, and states of mind or whatever, but they are actually realities. They are spiritual realities. They are inner realities, inner realm realities. And the inner realm, as they say, rules the outer realm. So, but you can't just, with your mind, for instance, command an animal to do this or to do that. It probably would just ignore you. Because you have to understand the rules of the inner realm. What are the rules? What's the system in order? What's the cosmogony of this inner realm? And that's what man is very short on understanding in this early Cosman era. But that's what man will come to understand as it unfolds during this Cosman era, as time rolls on. So in that regard, help understand this, we'll pose the simple question, which is that when you receive light, how do you sustain that light? Now, first of all, there's the corporeal light, right? The outer realm light. Well, that's easy. You got a fire going, you toss more wood on the fire, and that will sustain the light. But in the inner realm, how do you sustain the inner light? What do you do? How can you sustain it? Well, as it turns out, there is actually a way to sustain the light. And actually, there is a whole school on the inner realm that teaches about the inner realm things, and particularly with regard to the soul and the progression of the soul. And this schooling is called the Inner Temple, or Inner Temple Teachings. And the Inner Temple Teachings basically show you how, you learn. because it's through experiencing things, just as a child experiences corporeal things, then they learn to see how things fit together, and one thing follows another, and you have cause and effect type of thing and so forth. Well, you have the same thing in the inner realm. You can perceive how things go along. But first of all, when you receive something of light, well, first of all, can you even recognize it as light? And so that has to be the first task, is to recognize light as light. And this is where OSPI is invaluable, because it gives the rules of light. It gives the ways to start understanding what light is. And of course, the other religions in the world that have been here through the bond cycle, through the latter part of the bond cycle, they have also taught many of these teachings in their own way. And sometimes they skew them, and sometimes they don't. Just all depending upon the motive of that spirit that was in charge of propagating that religion. So the first thing that you learn in the inner temple then is how to stay with the light, how to find the light, how to stay with the light. Now, it's assumed that by this time that you know what light is, and you know that it's different from turning on a light switch in a room, because that's the outer realm. On the inner realm, how do you recognize it? And this recognition of light, well, okay, they say, like, for example, in communicating, that parallels are good. Now, analogy is that's what a parallel is, like an analogy. And so it helps people to understand what's going on the inner realm by use of an analogy. Generally speaking, these are corporeal analogies, but they don't have to be. They can be inner realm analogies as well, once a person starts to understand the inner realm. Basically, to sustain light, to find light, it takes basically following the commandments of old. You know, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not, and so forth. You know, the different commandments that the different religions usually have, and to some extent or other. But a lot of it is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, you know, the so-called golden rule. And so certainly you wouldn't want to be killed, so you don't go out killing. And that as an example. These rules, the foundation for the faithist discipline, the rudimentary ones, are becoming a clean, herbivorous man and woman of peace. And put away the foreheads of the beast, and, you know, to stop warring. Essentially, that's what a clean, herbivorous man and woman of peace means. And but basically, you have to start with cleanliness. And you can't progress really without cleanliness. Cleanliness is way down at the bottom. That's at the foundation. If you don't have cleanliness, everything else that you try to do is going to be, well, unclean, impure, unwholesome, unvirtuous. You can't, you know, it's going to be cloudy, confused, and all that. So you have to start with cleanliness. But cleanness in itself is not sufficient. It's necessary, absolutely, 100% necessary, but it's not sufficient all by itself. And in order to become sufficient, you have to not only master cleanliness. Well, how do you even start these things? Well, cleanness starts, with bathing daily and an herbivorous diet, and that is to say a vegan diet, and hygienic habits. And so with this cleanness, now that's the necessary part for advancing, but it's not sufficient all by itself. So this is why it says in Owaspy, for instance, that just because a person's herbivorous doesn't mean that they're necessarily spiritual or highly spiritual, because it's only the first step. It's the same as someone being in kindergarten, or in preschool. They're there and they're learning things, yes, but they're not well schooled in certain things, are they? No, because they're just getting the foundation set. And that's what cleanliness does. And so that has to come first. So after that, then you work on purity. Now, what's the difference between cleanness and purity? Basically, they're sort of muddled together. When you're on clean, it's different. In the first place, to start with, it's difficult to separate them. But we can give an analogy of think of water. Now, you know what water is. Now, water, when you have water, you can have, water is clean. You basically say, well, or is it clean? Well, first of all, you look. Is it muddy? If it's muddy, well, then it's not clean water. But we'll say clean water. Let's say we're getting it out of a well. So now you have clean water. But is that water pure? Well, it looks pure, but it may not be pure, because dissolved in that water may be agricultural runoff, and maybe there's some herbicides or pesticides in there, some toxins that you can't see them, but if you drink the water, they will surely have an adverse effect. And so that water is impure. It's clean water. It looks clean, we'll put it that way, but it's actually impure. It's not pure water. And even if it has, say, no poisons in it at all, it's still not pure water. It's water with dissolved minerals in it, which is the normal drinking water out of a well water, a clean well water without any poisons. But it's clean, but it's impure because it's not pure water. It's not 100% H2O molecules. As we said, it has dissolved minerals in it. Therefore, it's not pure water. Now, you can distill the water, and you can get pretty close to pure water, 99.99 something percent pure. And so now we have some idea of what purity is. And purity is, let's think, consider, for example, another analogy from times past. In the old days, they used to drink milk. And so they would say, well, the milk is pure. It's not clear, but it's pure, presumably pure. Now, it could be that some impurities crept into it, in which case then it would be impure. And so, for example, if some dirt fell into it or whatever, then it would be impure. However, what it is not is it's not clear. You cannot see through it. So that's the difference between purity and clarity. But we'll get to clarity in a bit. The next step after cleanliness is this purity. You want to try to attain to purity. Now we're talking about the inner realm purity. We're not talking about just clean water here. We're not talking either just about clean corporeal body from having an herbivorous diet, a vegan diet. This cleanliness also, because you have it in the outer realm, your body acts as a filter and acts as a covering for your spirit. It has an effect upon your spirit. And if your body is unclean, it's going to have an adverse effect upon your spirit. It'll have a poisoning effect, in fact, or an obscuring effect as well. It's important then to keep the body clean, but also unpolluted, because the pollution will cause the body which was pure to become impure, and that body which was impure, it will cause that impure body to become even more impure, a greater degree of impurity, and disease sets in and so forth. And so a person then, well, they start off life with a certain amount of purity. As a child, you start off with a certain amount of purity. Now, you might not have the clean body because unless your mother was herbivorous or vegan, you're going to have these unclean elements within. Now, another word for these unclean elements is stains. So you can wash clean the outer body, and yet because your covering is built from a matrix built from parents that were meat eaters and animal substance consumers, you're going to get some stains that are inherited. So they're difficult to wash out. It's like you can throw clothes into a washing machine, that are dirty, and it might, it'll clean out a lot of the dirt, but it won't get out the stains. And so that takes a prolonged time to get those stains out and to not be affected by those stains. But as we said, a child starts out with this purity in their physical body, a certain amount, a type of purity that they have, and they ideally consume their mother's milk, which is a pure food, and so they sustain this purity. And if they're fed then herbivorous food, that's to say vegan fare, then they will sustain this purity. How do you even sustain purity? And part of the way that you learn in sustaining purity, because you have to deal with the stains and all that you have inherited, as well as the elements in the outer realm, the stains that are in the outer realm, and the pollution that's in the outer realm. All that has to be dealt with as well. And so what you do is you look across your foundation to where you're going to, and what you actually find you're moving toward is wholesomeness. That's how you sustain purity, is through wholesomeness. In order to get there, because you're going to become stuck unless you have what's called goodness of heart. Now, goodness of heart is what allows basically a modicum of purity to sustain itself. Even if the body is unclean, you can still maintain a small modicum, at least a small modicum of purity. And that is because of the goodness of heart. But of course, these all affect one another. And so really in the sequencing of these conditions that we're speaking of, we're starting with cleanliness, and we mentioned that purity comes next, but it's a quicker rise if you have goodness of heart. Goodness of heart is like a doorway from cleanliness toward purity. It helps that purity to move, shall we say, from its initial condition toward greater purity, basically toward wholesomeness. Once you get to the condition of wholesomeness, which now then that's a good foundation. That's a good outer realm foundation. It's still not sufficient. It's necessary. This is all necessary, but still not sufficient. Because what's sufficient is we want to move toward clarity. Because remember, our quest is to, how do you know what truth is? How do you know what light is? How do you know, how do you recognize truth? How do you know truth when you hear it? Now we're talking an inner realm truth. We're not talking about the outer realm truth. We're talking about inner realm truth. And how do you know it's true? And if you perceive light, how can you sustain that light? And how can that light help you with all these understandings of the inner realm? And that sort of becomes self-evident during the process of moving through these stages of improvement of one's condition. And these can actually be depicted on the wheel of life, so that you start, and these are actually seats of these places. And so you have cleanliness in the North Station, and the North Station, recall, is down in the nadir, in the depth, way down. And remember, it could go down forever. Down, 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 down. There's no limit. The only limit is one's capacity to endure the darkness, the depth, the blackness of the soul, the deeper and deeper, denser and denser. Well, the deeper one is, of course, then the more one has to climb up out of that to come into the horizontal plane, that is to say, the regular, everyday, ordinary existence. And yet there's progression beyond that that's available, and that, of course, is way up at the South Station, which is up in the zenith. But we're talking about cleanliness right now, and the cleanness starts at the North Station. And then in the East Station, going up around the wheel through that first quadrant, then you reach the first station, and that's where purity is. That's where you start as a whole, and you're going to, from there, learn how to sustain that, which then becomes wholesomeness. And that's over in the West Station, the wholesomeness. And in between is that center. And in that center, which is directly above the North Station, and directly in between the North Station and the South Station, which is, of course, the vertical, directly in between that, and directly in between the East and the West, is that center station. And that center station that's the center. But you have two conditions there in that center, and there's a lower condition, which has to do with the downward tugged heart, and you have an upper condition, which has to do with the upward tugged heart. And this lower condition has to be attained first to advance fully, because, a person can build their castle on sand, but it's going to crumble, of course. And you can only do so much building on like that. So you want to have a sure foundation, which is the cleanliness, the cleanness. But it's more than just that. Because that was just an analogy, with the sand and the sand castle and all that. But so this lower tugged heart, this is the goodness of heart. This is where you respond with goodness of heart. When the heart is tugged downward, then we learn to respond with goodness of heart. Now, goodness of heart, babies have it. You see, they have goodness of heart. That's how come they're able to sustain their purity, because they can get to that wholesomeness, because that's who they are. They have that capacity. And mortals, when they've been given flesh food to eat, another animal substance, that takes them away from that. It makes it more difficult people lose their way, essentially. On the way, then, from purity to wholesomeness, you have this goodness of heart. We have to learn to respond with goodness of heart, with that tugging at the bottom of our heart. And if we don't respond to it, we're not going to rise. We're not going to be able to sustain wholesomeness. We won't be able to get there. Or at least we won't be able to get much from there, because we will be incapable of perceiving that which is there and using and utilizing that which is there. Not because it's not available, it's available, but because it won't be perceived, or one will be too distracted with other things in order to partake of which those who are of wholesomeness can partake. And they partake of ripened fruit and so forth. But one does not go then from wholesomeness directly up to clarity, because now that's way up in the zenith, way up at the top. And how that is attained actually is then from the wholesomeness is a movement back toward the center, to the heart, again, between the east and west stations, between purity and wholesomeness, midway in between, where the heart is. That's where the heart is, and it's going to be, and that's where the heart tugs come from. That's where they're going to be ultimately. There's an interior realm even to this, but we're not going to talk about that now. But just to let you know that these things, that what we're speaking of are rudiments. Rudiments means, of course, that they're very basic and underlie a lot of that which is important in the inner realm. And so what we have then is when you get to that center point, and there's your heart and the lower tug heart, how you even got there in the first place then is because you started to feel the upper tugged heart. And what does the upper tugged heart do? The upper tugged heart pulls you upward toward the zenith. And in that pull, you actually move toward the center. And when you get in that center, you find that you can only rise just a little bit. Just like in the center, you can only descend just a little bit in the goodness of heart before you start to lose the purity and the wholesomeness. So how do you sustain that? And how you sustain that is through this upper tugged heart. And so you can descend deeper if you have an upper tugged heart that you respond to. And what is this upper tugged heart? It's drawing you upward, calling you upward. That's the voice of Yul and Om. That's the voice of our Heavenly Father, calling to His sons and daughters to rise up to Him, to the glories that He has created for man to inherit as our heritage. This calling, this upward tugged heart we can only get so high with it we can only rise with it just a little bit until we start to develop this next condition. And this next condition is called virtue. Just as the lower tugged heart has the condition called goodness of heart, goodness of heart that allows purity and wholesomeness to exist on this lower level for sinking down, for the lower tugged, when you're being tugged downward, down to the earth, down to the individual, down to the selves. But this upward tug is toward the collective, toward the whole, toward the group, toward the celestial family of angels and archangels and Orions and Nirvanians and Oetans and Eons. So this is a calling upward, and to rise in this requires purity. It requires the wholesomeness, and it requires its cleanliness down at the base, and it requires the goodness of heart. And this virtue, and when we increase in this virtue, grow in this virtue, that allows us to rise up higher and higher toward that zenith. And what is up at that zenith but the quality, the existence of, the entity of clarity? This is how, and now what is this virtue? How do we rise in this virtue toward clarity? We rise in this virtue toward clarity through the faithist discipline, through those disciplines that are spoken of in Owaspy that man needs to do, or it's suggested that he do these things if he would rise toward Jehovah, if he would hear the Father's voice, if he would see and know of a surety his or her place of where they're going when they're in heaven. And that takes clarity, my friend. Understand where and how. And so the pathway through, the doorway, the gateway to this is through virtue. And virtue is attained through the faithist discipline. Well, it's not through the faithist discipline. It is the faithist discipline. The faithist discipline is doing those things, following the commandments and commands of Jehovah. It's doing those things that Jehovah himself spoke, as is written in the beginning of Olaspi. The first things out of the Creator's mouth toward man in this day and age, in this era, is become a herbivorous man and woman of peace, to put away the foreheads of the beast, to worship and serve only Jehovah, to separate ourselves from the dominion of the beast, to worship and serve only Jehovah, to follow his, obey, adhere to his commands and commandments, and to do good works. And we rise, and how we do that, we learn in Olaspi. It's spelled out in Olaspi in all these different places as to how we be, how we respond, what's the highest, best way to be, what's the highest, best way to respond. These rules for the inner realm. Now they're saying, do you have to obey them? No. In this Cosman era, they say this. This is what is said. You have complete freedom. You have total responsibility, though. With your total freedom, you have total responsibility. And so because we have this, we have choice. We're given choice. Now, if we go the beastly route, then we have to pay the price for that. And the price is the loss of the upper, loss of the higher. And yet there's a fullness of the lower that comes from experiencing the beast. And so, because it's Cosman is a balance between the two. And so, what have our grandmothers and grandfathers from going back thousands of generations, and what have they learned? What is their wisdom? And they will repeat what Jehovah said, one man, one woman. In other words, a monogamic marriage, one for the whole life. Now that's the ideal. That's what we move toward. They're saying this is the highest best for happiness, for joy, for fulfillment, for this inner realm, to be able to sustain the inner realm. If you go beyond that, you're going to lose some of that upper stuff, and things will start to become clouded and confused. In other words, you're not going to rise in virtue. You're not going to get above the clouds, the confusion, the opaqueness and all that. Well, people can say, well, I have flashes of clarity. Yes, you do. That's because of the angels. The angels come and they magnify Jehovah's light. They magnify his voice. And so you may get a glimpse of clarity, but how do you sustain that? That's not the big problem here that I'm going to be addressing right now, because a bigger question is, yes, you get a flash of clarity, but what you're seeing is actually, you're seeing it through an unclean, impure, clouded, that is to say, unclear lens. And so it's going to be distorted. What you're going to perceive is not going to be, yes, it's a part of absolute truth. You can see it. But what you don't see is that you're only seeing some little portion of it, and dimly at that, even though it seems clear as a bell to you, trust me, it's not. It's only just a little ding, and that's it. And yet there's truth there, and that truth can be built upon, but if it's being built upon by those who are impure and unclean and clouded, the results will show that. They cannot rise above where we are, except in our aspirations and in our emulation of those who are higher than we are. We're more advanced than we are. And I'm not talking here necessarily about whole grade either, because even somebody may be excellent in mathematics or in dealing with a young child or whatever it may be. They have an excellency there, and that's better than my excellency or your excellencies that you have or whatever. And so we can learn from each other, you see, from these excellencies. Well, what we're talking about here now is sustaining the light. How do you sustain the light? How do you find the light? How do you sustain the light? Because this is what the inner temple is. It can teach. It does teach. It will teach, because everyone joins it sooner or later. Why? Just like a child grows up and they want to go to school in the outer realm. You know, they have their schools, and children, and they don't get to go, they want to know about it. They want to know all these things about the corporeal realms and this and that and the other thing. And so they want some type of a schooling. Well, the same with the inner realm, and this is what the inner temple is. The inner temple is about teaching about the inner realm, but not just teaching about the inner realm per se, but also teaching about the rules of the inner realm, just like you go to schools in the outer realm and you learn about the rules of Corpor in physics, for instance. And these rules ultimately they become understood in context, not right away. A child, learns addition first and subtraction. 1 and 1 is 2, and all that stuff. Very simple, rudimentary stuff. But they have to start there. They're not going to understand calculus. There's just no way. And the same with those who are moving toward the interior realm. So you have to, as a student, you have to be able to trust your teacher, whoever it may be, that the teacher is teaching you the truth, so to speak. Initially, you have to do that. Because otherwise, you just can't advance. Because as a child, in the outer realm, for instance, starting with 1 and 1 is 2, well, that can be shown. You see, you can show the simple stuff. You can show, one apple and then another apple, and you put together, bring them together, and I give them to you, and now you have 2 apples. So that's 2. 1 and 1 is 2. So a child can grasp that, but it's the abstractions, and then from that, abstractions can be built. And so the same with spiritual things, okay, and the inner realm, that you have these truths. Well, the foundation truth is that the all-person lives and reigns and exists, our Heavenly Father, our Creator. This is the foundation. He's been given many names throughout history, and we learn what His name is, what the angels up in heaven say His name actually is, and so we learn this through Olaspi. But we can also understand it inside us because it fits with the light, and this is how we know it fits with the light. Unless you undertake the faithless discipline to some extent or other, you might not even understand this. You might not say, well, anybody, how do you know it's in the light and all that stuff? And that's exactly it. You can't proceed without actually taking the step forward to understanding it. Anyway, but that is the foundation of the inner temple, is the understanding that there is a coherency and a stability, a place of peace and understanding and depth and height and breadth that is the creation, not only the creation of the corporeal realm, but the inner realm as well. And at the core, and who is at the core of it, and who is at the depths and the heights, and to the furthest extremes. The point is, when you become an initiate in the inner temple, and you do this by asking Jehovah for it. That's what you do. You ask Jehovah for it. This teaching, I want to know about the inner realm. I want to know about this inner temple. I want to know how to improve my inner personage. And you will get a light. You will get, that's the initiation. You will get a light in the soul, in your soul. The angels of Jehovah will come to you, and they will illumine, they will magnify, is what they do. They magnify the light that's in you, which is the light of Jehovah, that little spark of light in there. And they will help it to magnify, just like a flame, a little fire can grow by adding wood to it. And it becomes a larger flame by adding fuel to it, or turning up the gas burner, if that makes better sense to you. So this increase, and the reason they do this, so that you, as an initiate, can look inward and see, my center of light. But this center of light, how do you sustain this center of light? Well, first of all, what you're going to find out, because there's labor involved in the inner temple. Just like in the outer realm school, you have homework, right? Or you have labor during the classes. Well, there's labor in the inner temple. So that when you're an initiate, you get this inner light, and now you got to find out, how do you stay with that light? How do you find that light and stay with it? You have it, and poof, and then it gets obscured. Some clouds will come over, it gets obscured by some impurity somewhere and all that. And Boom, and you have to find that light again because you know it's there. You know it's there because you've experienced it and you know it. It's there. And so that's what your quest is then, to find that light, to stay with that light. Because what you want to ultimately have is you want to stay with that light until that light becomes a manifested reality within you that never goes away, ever. And you know that it never ever goes away, and it's always there with you, and that you can access it at any time. And ultimately you will attain to that. But that's only just the attainment of the first degree. That's only just the first lesson. The first in the inner realm life. The understanding that you have this light within, this soul light within, and that you can progress, because that's the next understanding. Because once you've attained to it, how do you have it grow? And there's more. There's further degrees, further courses, if you want to think of it in that sense. The point here, in keeping with our subject matter, is that by understanding, because we learn about the inner realm life as we learn to find that inner light and to stay with that inner light, and we grow toward improving this light. Because we learn along the way, we begin to recognize light. Light in others, light in ourselves, light in all things, in fact. Truth is another name for light. Now, there's only one whole truth, 100% truth. That's the all-person. But we move toward that. Eternally, we're moving more and more toward union, toward becoming as the all-person. And of course, that means many things, one of which is communion with all things below, as well as understanding communion with all things above, as well as understanding the idea of eternal veils, which are eternally being lifted, and the importance of those, and so forth. All this stuff is way, way understandable when you progress in the inner temple of Jehovah. And one of the prime things, of course, is service to Jehovah. Is to be, how do you be good-hearted? And what does it mean? And of course, what that means is that you respond. You become responsible to whatever it is that Jehovah directly inspires you to do. So that when a light comes, and you want to go with that light to find out what that light is about, you can do so. And you can understand the person or group that's emitting that light. You can understand where they are and where they're coming from. You can attain to all these things. All this is attainable as part of our spiritual heritage. In the past measure of Cephas, we've learned about corporeal things. Now is the time to learn about the S things and to balance them with corporeal things. Jehovah said, one man, one wife. Why? Because of the monogamic mixing of seed, and there's things that go on in the inner realm that Jehovah allows those, a monogamic marriage, only one marriage, one man, one woman, a lifetime. They allow those to rise together. When that's not the case, then it becomes very difficult. As a matter of fact, by themselves, they cannot rise and they cannot sustain. And they depend upon the angels of Jehovah to do that. Assuming that, and of course, the angels of Jehovah may or may not be of assistance at any particular time, because they have freedom too, but also because they, just like any parent would, want their child to stand on their own and be able to walk on their own. So we can't be depending upon the angels of Jehovah to do things for us. We want to learn to do for ourselves. That's why we want to perceive what is truth and what is light, and is it true? So that, for instance, if you hear a truth or something that has light about the resurrections, where did it come from? Well, the point is, it doesn't matter where the light comes from, because light is light and truth is truth. And the vehicle, the channel, the radio, the television, the smartphone across whom it comes, it doesn't matter. It's the light inherent that does make the difference. And we can know whether it's true and how much of it is true and where it's true and where it's not true and all that as we rise toward clarity. We rise in virtue toward clarity, and our mind starts to clear. And of course, all that presupposes everything underneath is constitutional growth, at least. And so how does that go? Well, because a person starts out in darkness, and they start off impure and unclean and clouded, and perhaps not the best goodness of heart, and not the best of virtues, and yet they're still able to progress. They're still able to step by step move toward the light. And that starts, again, with the cleanness, the cleanliness. These steps are the only way to reach that. Save the angels come, and they might inspire you from time to time with this, that, and the other thing. They may or may not, and you have no control over that. But by learning through the inner temple, you gain control, because that's the purpose of the inner temple, is for you to understand the inner realm, and for you to understand how to rise to become one with Jehovah in this inner realm, to rise toward clarity, to rise toward the all perfection. And so we don't have to ask then necessarily, where did that light come from? Or is it true or not true? Because we can perceive it of our own accord, whether it is or isn't. And now this doesn't mean that people should just shut up and not try to help each other to understand. Because sometimes, we're clouded in one area, it's obscured and we don't understand it, but somebody can come along from a different perspective. And for the person receiving it, it might be a more clear path, and they can more clearly perceive, aha, that's the truth of that thing. But now the outer realm, they work on authority, because the outer realm, that's the beast realm, that's the physical creation. That's the part of the body of Jehovah, the all person, the outermost body. And so we can learn things and understand things. We depend upon authority a lot. And we depend upon authority because they're recognized as authorities by others whom we respect, or we're taught to respect. And so if someone utters something that's of light, and it's not written down yet, it's not, but it's uttered, and a person perceives it, or they hear it, if they perceive the light in it, then that's good. If they don't perceive the light in it, well, if it's a spiritual truth, if it's about the inner realm, they may not be able to understand whether it's true or not. And so they might search around for authority. Well, who's the authority on this? Where is the authority? And of course, in the land of the beast, there's a lot of people who claim to be authorities, because the beast realm has to do with the alpha male and alpha female. And who's the alpha? Who's the one in charge? Who's the one at top? Who has the say-so? And the beastly hierarchy demands that everybody try to become the alpha beast and maintain their level, such as it is. And so basically, if you ask those who are enmeshed in the outer realm for authority, or to their understanding of the inner realm, they're likely to guide you to their own alphacy, so to speak, so that you acknowledge them for their alpha status, and therefore they'll be happy to have you as a disciple or whatever. But Jehovah's inner temple is not like that at all. There's no one here that's seeking disciples. There's no one here wanting disciples. We all are born with our talents, with our gifts that Jehovah has given. And so we express whatever it is that we express. And to the extent that we express the light of Jehovah, to the extent that we express Jehovah, so we're blessed. And so we're able to give forth that which is nourishing to others, to help them to also draw closer to Jehovah, and to also be able to perceive and understand His creation from their own perspective, for however Jehovah created them. Because the Jehovahans, they have no threat. They feel no threat from others claiming to have this truth or that truth. Claims are claims. Truth is truth. And so, to the faithist who is one with Jehovah, what does it matter? If it creates good in the world, if it leads to peace and love and understanding and harmony and symmetry and music and rejoicing of soul and wise dominion, it is good, yes? So how do we sustain the light? How do we recognize light then? We know. And even if this little talk hadn't happened, we could still know, because it's in Owaspy, and it's in our soul, it's in our heart, it's in our milieu, let's say. We'll put it that way. It's in the angels up there, people like you and I who have passed on to this corporeal realm and are now up in spirit, and have been up in spirit for hundreds of years, thousands, tens of thousands of years. So they're quite wise. They're quite knowledgeable. And how do we know that we ain't going to get fooled? Aha! So that's a good question, an excellent question. How do we know that we're not going to get fooled? And that's why Jehovah, and we're told in Owaspy, man is given a spark of light from the Creator, a spark from his very essence. And each of us has that. And because of that, we can perceive truth. We can perceive light. We have to develop toward it to become good at it. And again, it's the faith that's discipline. Do you have to join the inner temple? You don't have to do anything. Jehovah gave you free choice here in this Cosman era. But with that free choice comes responsibility. Sooner or later, people are going to. It doesn't matter to me whether, however, or whenever. You have to understand how the inner temple works before you start assuming things. Or you think of the outer realm. Now, the outer realm is not all that far different in many ways from the inner realm, as far as, because the inner realm rules over the outer realm. So those practices of the inner realm tend to manifest in the outer realm. So you have classrooms in the outer realm, and you have many teachers. You don't just have one teacher that all the students in the world go to. No, you have teachers everywhere. Okay, those who can impart light. And impart light what? According to their specialty. According to that which Jehovah has created within them to progress in, to become, have an excellency in. And this is the idea of heaven. Yes? Everyone is shining forth in their excellencies, and in virtue, and in love, and in beauty, and harmony, and glory, and following the commands and commandments of Jehovah, willingly, wanting to, desiring to with all their soul and mind and heart, because it's the way of happiness. It's the way of joy. It's the way of life. It's the way of those elder brothers and sisters of ours, our grandparents and great-grandparents and so forth, all the way back. They're all up there. They've risen above Segwan. Segwan is the black doubt. See, the reason of man can only rise so high. Zarathustra taught this. It's in Owaspy. Reason can only take you so high, and it can't take you any higher because Segwan, the black doubt, will come in. Why? Because logic alone, reason alone, cannot answer every question. It cannot get to the total core of the issue. And there is only one that can do that in totality, and that's the all-person. Again, but as we approach the all-person, we gain in those attributes as well. But unless and until a person takes that first step of cleanliness. You see, all these things of cleanliness and purity and goodness of heart and wholesomeness and virtue and clarity. Again, cleanliness first. 2, purity. 3, goodness of heart. 4, wholesomeness. 5, virtue. 6, clarity. Those attainments, they fulfill the 6 points of the 6-pointed star, the Getza'an, perfect dominion. We want to attain toward perfect dominion. We don't start there. We start with Getza'an, which is dominion per se. And man started with that all the way back to the first era, when man learned that he had capacity for knowledge, power, and dominion. So now is the time for man to move toward perfect dominion, to understand that. And so taking those first steps, without those first steps, little is going to be accomplished. But the great accomplishments will come from those who follow those, who adopt those, who aspire toward, to attain to those qualities, those inner temple realities, inner realm realities, because they are realities, and they are manifested in the inner realm, and others in the inner realm perceive those realities, recognize them, and react accordingly. Even those mortals who don't believe in it or understand it, they react to them, to unseen realities. Everyone does, because that's the way Jehovah created creation. That's the way Jehovah made it. That's a good thing. Can we come up with a better creation? Well, you're going to get your opportunity. What? Yes, as an Oitan. But that's way up there. That's way, way up there. We read about that in Owaspy. They create worlds. We're not anywhere near that level, because there's more than just understanding corporea, because when you're building a world, you have to understand the inner realm as well, because you're building a nursery for the souls, new souls that are going to be coming forth, such as you and I are. We're just younglings here. We're told in the WASPI about Spinch-Armitage and how they had the three births. You have the birth from the mother's womb, the young child comes forth, and man has nothing really to do with that. He has very little to do with his next birth, which is birth into the spiritual realm from the corporeal, or losing our corporeal body and passing on into the atmospherian realm. So that birth, we have something to do with, because where we end up in that birth is just like we're in a womb right now. This corporea is like a womb, and we're like feeding our soul substance, our inner realm substance. We're like preparing ourselves for this birth into the next realm. And how we do that will depend upon what our birth is going to be like in the next realm, whether we're going to be deformed or come out more perfectly in what we are. And if we are deformed, well, then the angels of Jehovah have some work to do to help that person to understand things spiritually and all that. But just like a person can get, doing the same job day after day, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, hundreds of years after hundreds, centuries after centuries, and millennia after millennia, the angels say, enough already. Man, it's time for you to come forth here into our realm as a wholesome birth. And that's our charge. One of our charges here during this Cosmic era. It's an important charge, man, it's there. And that will greatly relieve the angels, because what will that do? Not because they can go off, let's go rest and kick back and relax. No, it's not that. But they have all these other realms of possibilities that we have never thought about. Okay, all these realities that we have yet to perceive that are just waiting there, but they can't attend to, they can't get to them because we're not ready to receive them yet. It's not that they're not withholding them purposely. We're just not ready. Just like you can't teach calculus to a kindergartner. Not going to understand it. It's over their heads. So this is the idea, you see, for man to help man to rise up out of this. Because in every era when we come forth, or every Danhe cycle, man is required to participate in the labor of that cycle. And this is our cycle. That is our cycle, what was just said. In part. It may be an important part, yes, but it's still in part, because there's a lot of other things, too, that also go along that get developed during this time, but which we're not going to touch on because it's outside the scope of this particular talk. So this, then, is how you sustain the light. So when a light comes to you, you know how to sustain it. And here's the secret. Here's the secret of how to sustain that light. How you sustain that light on the inner realm is to become one with that light. That is how you sustain it. Now that's not really any different from the corporeal realm, except in the corporeal realm it's expressed outwardly, because the corporeal realm is the outermost realm of all of Jehovah's realms. The outermost is the corporeal realm. That realm right there. So what is this? So if the inner realm is the way that it is, which is that you sustain the light by becoming one with it, how in the outer realm is the light sustained and all that? Well, how is the outer realm sustained? And how the outer realm is sustained is it's sustained through marriage and through the child coming forth, which brings forth a new life, a new soul. And that's why it's important. One man, one woman. Partly why it's important. Just one man, one woman. So that the vibes don't get mixed up. Otherwise, the vibes get mixed up and things get confused, and darkness comes in and clouds and opaqueness and impurities and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, but that is like the outer realm sort of equivalent of how light gets passed on. Yes, there's a union, but it's a union, but it's a special type of union. And that union is a union with Jehovah's body, with Jehovah's corporea. And that's the fruit that comes out of that. Now, a person doesn't have to engage in that in order to experience oneness with Jehovah's outer realm, but it is the avenue through the beast creation the animal creation. That type of a union of sustaining of the light, a sustaining of life is done, is created. But in the inner realm, you become one with the light. You rise up into that light. If it's a higher light, if it's a lower light, you become one with it. And it rises up to where you are. And that's basically it. And of course, there's no ego involved in any of this. That is to say, vanity or anything like that as far as the tetracts go and all that. Because the all person, ever higher, ever more wise, there's nothing that is, and we have these countless billions and trillions and quadrillions of angels up in Etheria, and even in our atmosphere we have all these billions of angels up there. This is an opening for man to rise up to his heavenly inheritance from his heavenly Father. And we have angels up there who are hopeful, because man, as was said, as in Owaspy, man participates in these events of his times in order to help the Father's kingdom, in order to help move toward Jehovah's realm as it is in heaven, have that on earth through living the type of life that's one with Jehovah, only in the corporeal realm. And man is going to attain to that. By 2249, Father's kingdom will be an ascendancy all the way around the world. 2149, it's going to first crystallize. We're moving toward that. 2049, we're going to see the fraternity coming forth. The truth of all these can be read. We're told in Owaspy about Apollo, who says you can look forward or backward as far as you wish. And it's like being there, and you can perceive it. But what he doesn't say, which I will state here, is that when you perceive that, you are only perceiving sort of like a picture of it rather than the real thing. But it's more like a holodeck experience, a subjective experience. But it's still, nonetheless, a depiction. But it's only just a depiction. And it's only the same as perceiving a light. When we're not clear enough, we perceive the light and we perceive that truth. We perceive the light of that truth from our perspective, from our vantage point. And so it's similar to that. As you can see into the future and into the past, it's not going to be, you're not going to perceive it in its great fullness, is what it is. That has to be experienced. You can know certain things are coming up. For example, we know if it's summertime that autumn's going to come and winter's going to come, spring, and then another summer. We know that, but we don't necessarily know all the details. Well, man is becoming smarter at this time, more intelligent in that regard, or wiser, I should say, more knowledgeable, perhaps would be the best way to say it, more knowledgeable about these things, and he understands that we're going to have an El Nino year or a Niña year, and so he can now understand if it's going to be a cooler summer or a warmer summer, et cetera, and where that might be at, and so forth. So that, you see, as our understanding grew, as our knowledge grew, so the picture of what we're able to perceive in the future and in the past can grow as well. Because, for example, until we found out about the Niña and the Niño, those two variations there in the Pacific Ocean of the climate, why would you wouldn't even think about looking backwards for those or looking forward for those patterns, the repetition of them, because you wouldn't know what you were looking for. And so it's the same way, looking into the future, you can see certain things to a certain amount of detail, maybe we could say, but still we have to understand it's just a picture of it. And it's not it's like a forecast. And yes, and it can be a very accurate forecast, but it's not going to be the fullness of it. And it's not going to be all the variations. For example, if you plant, say, an orchard and you're growing fig trees, okay, well, you know that you're going to get figs from these trees. You don't know necessarily how the trees are going to develop. You don't know how prolific they're going to be necessarily, at least at this point in our time, and their size and shape. You're going to know generally, but you're not going to know specifically. There'll be variations. And so there's all these considerations as well. Anyway, we're starting to go afield from our original question. So, and our original question has to do with, how do you tell truth and from non-truth, and how do you know if it's light or not, and who's the authority you can go to in that regard. And ultimately, we want to be able to go to the source, Jehovah, and ask Jehovah directly. Within our heart, within our soul, ask Jehovah for the truth of the matter, and he will tell you if you're capable of perceiving that answer or not. You may or may not be able to perceive. It just depends upon your level of understanding, because you have even gods, for instance, who don't understand what to do in a situation, so they'll ask Jehovah, well, what do I do here? And then Jehovah will let them know what to do there, because the gods are not omniscient. They're not all-knowing. So neither are we. The only one all-knowing is the all-person Jehovah. So we have these glorious times to look forward to. There will be those who pioneer and go forth in these things, and there will be those who are hesitant to go forth for whatever reason. That they will come. They'll come a little bit later, maybe when the conditions are more conducive to it, and it becomes more socially acceptable, or whatever it may be. And more, people will do it. But you'll always have those pioneers who go forth and establish, who blaze the trails, to where it what needs to be done in the name of Jehovah, even though they may not acknowledge the name, but they will certainly, if they're living in his light, the light of inspiration. See, veganism, that's the foundation. That's the foundation for man moving forward, upward and onward. That's the only way he can go forward. And people who are vegan, many of them, most of them, perhaps all of them understand this. Now, there might be some that don't. So what? It doesn't change the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is that this is where man is headed toward. And so we have these pioneers going forth. We have an army of them, in fact, at this time. And these are God's army. And they're not going to be stopped. The pioneers have done their pioneering, and they're still pioneering to some extent, but they're socially, it's starting to become acceptable. Oh, sure, you'll always have those who dig in their heels and are going to be the last to change over, and maybe not even till after they're dead. Woe be to them is what will happen, because it's, let's just say they'll come to regret it. Not because someone's going to punish them, and not because they're going to go to hell or whatever, but because they basically turned their back on Jehovah. They turned away from Jehovah and followed the beast instead of Jehovah. When they will know better. Everyone will know better. It's out there right now in the corporeal science that vegan diet is healthier, better for a person. It doesn't have anything to do with spirituality. It's just better for a person. So, then this is all a part of this movement for man to move to the next step, upward and onward with Jehovah. First and foremost, with his holy heavenly brothers and sisters of ours, who are his children, his sons and daughters, high upraised. We're like his little children. But they're still our brothers and sisters. They're still equal in the sense that we're all brothers and sisters. But we're unequal in this sense. They're of much higher grade. They're closer to Jehovah than we are. So we emulate our elder brothers and sisters. That's the natural course. You have a young child comes into being and comes out of the mother's womb, and it begins to emulate the parents, elder brothers and sisters. That's the same with mortal man. And when he's born into the spirit realm, he'll begin to emulate our elder brothers and sisters. And they're not here to rip us off, because that's the beast. Now, if a person lives as a beast, they're likely to they'll be born into heaven amongst, remember, like attracts like. That's one of the rules of the unseen realm, like attracts like. And so they're going to end up, in a selfish heaven. So it's important, that we develop in these qualities, these good qualities, and rise in virtue, so that Jehovah's kingdom can come, so that everyone can feel and participate and understand and be brought up in this higher feeling and mode of existence. There will be some who say, bah, humbug. Well, that's their choice. Jehovah has given choice. That's not going to stop his kingdom from coming. It just means that a person messes up for a while. That's all. But we who understand this, we continue to go forward. We continue to do what Jehovah directly inspires each person, each individual person to do, each faithist to do. Do the best of our ability to do so. We do so. And to the extent that we're close, as close as we can get to Jehovah and doing his will, the more we're blessed. The more we receive blessings, that is to say, because it's also one of the rules of the unseen realm is as you sow, so shall ye reap. And so reaping goodness of heart will result not only in goodness of heart, but an increase in goodness of heart, because that's also one of the unseen rules, is increase, abundance. That is Jehovah's creation, abundance. It doesn't create in little hillocks and little ponds and a few measly species here and there. No, millions of species, millions of individuals of a species. He does things big time. And we as individuals, we have to do our part. We can choose to do our part, or we can choose not to do our part. The part that Jehovah has created, because he's created within, that spark of light within. We'll find it, and we'll know how to proceed. When everyone does this, there will be a heaven on earth, won't there? May the blessings of Jehovah go with each and every person. Rise up to his direct inspiration.